So with that, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Rick Reese.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's absolutely a delight to be here. This is my first time at Syracuse University, first time in town, and I'm just so impressed. It's a beautiful place. I thought Stanford does have nice architecture, but it's all the same. And here, there's a variety of old and new that really, really is beautiful. And it's a wonderful town. Even here, you have something on occasion called rain. And we don't know about that anymore in California, but some of us who are a little bit older do kind of remember it. And, it was wonderful to also come here and meet my colleague Cliff Davidson, who's in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I knew Cliff when he was at Carnegie Mellon, and he and a colleague of his, Susan Ambrose, are the author of, I guess it's called a faculty... New Professor's Handbook. And you really need to get a copy of that. I mean, that's the book you need when you get started out as a new professor, if that's in fact going to be the route that you take. So I want to give a little plug there. As I say, I've been impressed with a lot of things, but I think the most impressive thing I've heard so far is that an English major actually knows that the universe is not only expanding, but expanding at an expanding rate. Now that's really impressive, Glenn. I mean, you got my heart there for sure. Let me ask you a few quick questions just to get a sense of what the audience is like in terms of diversity here, and then I can perhaps tailor some of my comments a little bit more carefully that way. Glenn has given me a pretty good indication that most of the people in the room are in fact PhD students, but are there any postdocs here? Okay, so there are a few postdocs. I'm assuming that there may be a few master's degree students as well, but most of the rest of you are PhD students. So quickly, how many of you are in the natural sciences, which, the earth sciences, the physical sciences, and the life sciences? Okay. How many are in the social sciences? Very good. How about humanities? How about, say, education, law, things like that? Okay. How about engineering? Okay. Good. Now, I know I've left some things out, so you can tell me if that's the case. But it's quite a diverse group, and I can see that, and that's actually just terrific. That's valuable. The Tomorrow's Professor book that Glenn referred to was indeed subtitled Preparing for Academic Careers in Science and Engineering. But the blog, we didn't call it a blog when it started about 15 years ago, but this e-newsletter that you referred to covers all fields. And so it's something that I think will be of interest to all of you. Many of you are subscribers, and all of you will be subscribers pretty soon because he's going to give me your email address, and I'm just going to go ahead and subscribe to you. How do you think I get 58,000 subscribers? If you want to unsubscribe, you can actually do that without me knowing it, but I hope that you actually will find this as something that you will carry through with you. The postings are twice a week, and I'll talk a little bit about them at the end of my talk today. Okay. So, as Glenn indicated, I want to talk about a number of things today, briefly as possible. Maybe the best takeaway, now that I think about it, if we go back here, the best takeaway, can you hear me in the back there? Okay, I think it's a little more comfortable if I don't use the mic. Probably the biggest takeaway, which you may not be able to see, but which I can tell you is REIS, my last name, at stanford.edu. That's the most important thing you really need, because that's how you can reach me. Now again, I'm going to have all your email addresses, and that's important too, because I have some follow-up information that I want to send you, and I'll do that. But I really mean it when I say that this is an address you can use, and if you have questions following all of this, you want to say, well, my situation's a little different, and it didn't come up, I want to talk to you about that, send me an email at this address. Also, the presentation that you're going to see will be sent to you by Glenn. You'll send in the presentation. So they'll have it. You have it, you'll send it to them. All right. Okay. do is say a few words about higher education as it now exists in the United States. You're part of that, but sometimes seeing the broader picture can be helpful because not everybody in this room is going to want to be a professor, although most of you do, of one kind or another. But not all of you will want to be a professor at an institution like the one you're in now. So you should know about some others. And then I want to talk about these career paths. There's 5 possible career paths. Probably more, but here are ones that will cover a range of options that would be available to you, from the tenure track position to the non-tenure track position. By the way, the people that drive around in the Volkswagen Bug from school to school are called Rhodes Scholars. We'll talk about other kinds of positions and other kinds of institutions. And then I want to concentrate on the strategy that I think might be helpful for you in pursuing whatever these goals are. It's a strategy I still use myself, so it's not something that I think is confined to just being as a graduate student or postdoc. And then we'll conclude with just a few remarks about that newsletter. Okay. So, roughly speaking, there are that many, 4,600 or so, post-secondary institutions in the United States. There are about 20 million students and about 1.5 million faculty. Okay? So when I say I have 58,000 subscribers, I mean I'm not barely scratching the surface here. We have room for growth. So you know, that sort of looks like a good news. I mean, from your point of view, there's 20 million students and 1.5 million faculty. There's got to be a place for it. Well, maybe. Okay, so there are different types of institutions, and they go by different categories and so forth and so on, but these are the ones that will make most sense to you. There are actually, this number is a little too high, there are about 1,500 community colleges in the United States with 370,000 faculty. Santa Monica City College is one example of that. There are liberal arts or bachelor granting institutions. These are 2-year colleges. They offer AA degrees, associate art degrees. But they're 2 years, and they're either used as transferred to 4-year institutions, or they provide a technical education that's useful at the end of the degree. There are about 630 institutions that fall into what's called the liberal arts baccalaureate category. They offer bachelor's degrees, but usually not master's degrees. About 95,000 faculty at these institutions. Many of you, several of you at least, have gone to such institutions as undergraduates. Maybe you also went here as well. Then there's a large group of what are called master's granting comprehensive universities. Again, about 600 institutions, same as here, but quite a few more faculty because they are, in fact, quite large. A good example is the school near where I am, near Stanford, called San Jose State University. That's 30,000 students, and it offers bachelor's and master's degrees. And so it has a large number of faculty, as you might imagine. And we have a lot of programs at Stanford that help Stanford PhD students connect with schools like San Jose State for possible faculty positions. And then there's the kind of institutions that you're a part of here at Syracuse University, schools that offer bachelor's, master's, and PhDs. They're called doctorate or research universities. These are actually 2 categories, although the research universities offer doctorates. But in any case, there are only about 280 of those institutions, but they have a huge number, almost 400,000 faculty. Half the students in the United States going to 4-year schools go to these kinds of institutions. And so that's where, in fact, a lot of the jobs are. Okay. Within higher education, there are differences both among schools, the kind I just showed you, the different categories of schools, and then there are considerable differences also within an academic institution, across various departments. And you've gotten some hint of that, but you're now in a particular department, in a subgroup, working on your dissertations for most of you. Again, some of you are postdocs, so you're even more focused on your research. So you're down there in the trenches with a particular specialty, and that's exactly where you need to be at the moment. You'll be pulling out of that at some point. And then you'll recognize that there is, in fact, you have colleagues all across the university, and there are quite a bit of differences among what goes on there. There's differences in prestige. The truth is, that's the way it is. And for better or worse, usually medicine and law are at the top of that list. Natural sciences, maybe engineering, close behind somewhat. Social sciences, humanities, further down, and so on. You need to be aware of that. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just the way it is. And it's reflected in salaries in many cases. It does depend on the kind of institution. If you go to a community college, or if you go to one of those comprehensive universities I mentioned, actually the starting salary ranges are pretty much the same. There's a range, but there's narrow ranges, and they're pretty much the same across disciplines. So the physics professor and the biology professor and the English professor and the humanities, social science professor, psychology professor, all will pretty much be starting in the same range, and they'll step through that. But at private institutions or larger research universities, it tends to come down to supply and demand. And you will find that there are, in fact, significant differences among the salaries of your colleagues in different disciplines. So you need to be aware of that. It's a trade-off in many cases. So the history professor or the comparative literature professor will certainly be making less in many cases than the mechanical engineering professor, or certainly the professor in medical school, but let's just say the mechanical engineering professor or the physics professor. But the expectations will also be different. So that history professor may have 2 or 3 PhD students, and that history professor won't be worried about where to get money to pay for those students because the department will be providing that money. It's the mechanism to fund the PhD students in history. And those students will be doing research, of course, and they'll be related to what the advisor does, but they will almost certainly not be co-authors of anything. And they'll be somewhat separated. Also, the resources required to do that kind of research in the history department will be much less expensive than it might be in, say, mechanical engineering or in physics. The physics professor will be making more money, could be making even twice as much money. But we'll have to raise at least half of that money, maybe more, from external grants that are very, very competitive. And they will have to write those grants. Those are the grants that will provide the money, in many cases, to support their PhD students, of which they will have several, maybe 10 or 11 even in some cases, maybe even more. And they will have to worry about that, and they will have to continually provide those funds. And so there are trade-offs, and you just need to know that. It's interesting, and when you work with these colleagues, because you'll all be part of committees, particularly undergraduate committees, you have to understand the incentives will be different, the time spent, the resources needed, and so forth will be different. The teaching loads will also be different. This is a word I don't like, that's why I put it in parentheses. Teachers often talk about their teaching loads and how to get them to be as small as possible. But the fact that they use the word load tells you something I think quite negative. I call it teaching commitment. And it's something you need to want to do. Even if it's a small amount, you need to want to do it well. And again, at certain institutions, the amount of teaching you will do will be greater or less, depending on what the institution expects you to do otherwise. And so at Stanford, sure, you're expected to get those grants, you're expected to have those graduate students, you're expected to put out a large number of significant papers and so forth, and you need time to do that. And so we hire you on that basis, and we have you teach a few classes a year, maybe 3 or 4 a year. Whereas at the San Jose States I mentioned, you will still be expected to do research and still be expected to do scholarship, but not as much, and not with the extended resources. You won't have PhD students, you'll have master's students. And so your teaching commitment, the number of classes you teach, will be larger. at the school that Glenn went to as an undergraduate, Carleton College. It's all basically undergraduate teaching, but it still involves some scholarship and work from the faculty, most of whom, almost all of whom, have PhDs. So they're like you. They've gone to a school like a liberal arts college. They're teaching undergraduates. They have to figure out how to do some scholarship and involve their undergraduates in that work. So again, things vary. Again, I already mentioned number of graduate student research costs. Recently we hired a professor in mechanical engineering at Stanford University who has a PhD in zoology and a master's degree in mechanical engineering. He's from the Netherlands. His specialty is bird flight. And he studies the flight of birds and their wings and the energy and so forth that's used in doing that. And as part of his startup package, he said, well, I need a wind tunnel to put my birds in. And okay, where do we get one of those? You know, it's not like, even like asking for an electron microscope or something like that, where, you know, okay, we know there are a lot of places you can buy them. They may cost $1 million, but, you know, we'll get you one. If something happens to you, at least other people will use it. He said, no, I need a bird wind tunnel. So I actually flew with this guy over to Prague to try to find a place that would actually make one of these tunnels. Apparently there are very few wind tunnel makers in the world, period. And none of them, per se, make wind tunnels for birds, but they will modify wind tunnels for birds. So, there are wind tunnels that don't just use airplanes, don't model airplanes, they may have trucks and cars. So it's possible to do this. Anyway, so we've constructed him, after 2 years, this giant $1 million wind tunnel. And we'll see. Every time I see that guy, I ask, how is your health? You know? Because if something happens to him, I don't think there's anybody else that's going to. And then there's, of course, again, these differences in terms of internal and external support. A lot of the humanities and social sciences, to some extent, the support is internal, and it's relatively small, but it's usually much more flexible. Again, in the fields that are mostly represented here, external, very competitive support. I will say one quick thing here, though, and this relates to something that Glenn was saying about multiple options and thinking, while you're here, thinking about other possibilities. Even if you become a professor at a research university and you're in the sciences or engineering or whatever, the contacts that you make outside of the university, particularly, not just in government, but particularly in industry, can be very useful to you in terms of getting some of these grants. And more we see this happening. So I'll get to that when I quickly talk about the multiple strategy in a minute. I better move on a little quicker here. Types and number of authorships, again, ranging from I did it myself to, I think the largest publication that I know of was a co-author publication, was one in physics. But I may be wrong about this. Because my data is old. It was in 1980 something. It was 130 people were co-authors of a research paper in high energy physics. I've often wondered to what extent any one of those people, picked at random, could actually get up and give a talk about the paper. I'm not sure that there would be too many people like that. But in some fields, it's all co-authorships, and it has to do with who's first author and so forth and so on. In other fields, you're the author. Okay. So now this is what I really wanted to talk about. Again, we're going to go through each of these. The one that you hear about the most is the tenure-track position. You start out as an assistant professor after either getting your PhD or, in many cases, a postdoc for a few years. You start out as an assistant professor. You should get a 3-year appointment with the understanding that that should be renewed for another 3 years, taking you through 6 years. But you would be evaluated at the end of 3 years. But there probably wouldn't be any promotion. It would just be another extension of the assistant professorship through 6 years. It's in the 6th year that you will then be evaluated for tenure. So all your papers, all the things that you have to put together to your portfolio of all that information will be evaluated in the 6th year. And then you would be either awarded tenure for starting your 7th year. Usually you get a sabbatical at that time, and you can actually take off a year and do other, well, you can do other things, take off. You can do other things for a year, but now you have tenure and you're promoted to an associate professor, or you're not. And in some cases that happens. I think you need to realize that most schools really don't want that to happen. They really don't. It's a failure on their part. Think of the investment for 6 years that they put into you. And for you to not make tenure is very costly, and it reflects negatively on them. It reflects negatively on the department chair and on the dean, whose job it is to bring in the best people possible. Keep that in mind. There used to be a few schools like Harvard which would actually hire 6 or 7 professors in a field and say, basically, you know, 1 or 2 of you at most is going to get tenure. And it was kind of understood, and so in that case, actually not getting tenure at Harvard wasn't such a bad deal. You could go to a lot of other places. But Harvard stopped that now. They've stopped that, and they really intend to have the beginning professors get tenure as well. So that's typically what happens at associate professorship. Then you become a full professor a few years later. And that's a stable position, certainly as long as the field is still active. Okay. But that's only one possibility. And while, again, it may be the one that most people want, what I have found over the last few years in reading and talking to people and so forth is that other options are becoming more attractive. They're not just option B. In fact, we try to get away from that term. It's another option, but it's not the second, you know, what's your second option or your third option. Some people actually, an academic position where they're an adjunct or a lecturer, not on the tenure track, can have advantages in terms of flexibility, in terms of the responsibilities that they do and don't have at the institution, and the ability to either teach a lot or not teach a lot, depending if they're a research professor or a teaching professor of some kind. And yes, it doesn't come with a guaranteed long-term employment, but I again am finding, and maybe you are too, as you talk to your colleagues at your age, that is becoming less important than it used to be. The idea that you could move from one place to another, or you could start out in a position like this and then maybe have that lead to something more permanent if you wanted it later. We'll talk about that. I mentioned a community college. Community colleges comprise, there are half the number of schools in the U.S., and they enroll about half the number of students. They're 2-year institutions. Their main focus is, their almost exclusive focus is on teaching and learning, and usually have very diverse populations. Almost all, but a high percentage of the students going to community college are first-time college students, in the sense that nobody else in their family or in their parents' at least hadn't gone to college. And in many groups, they represent the majority. So it's a new experience for them. I went to a community, when I graduated from high school in Los Angeles 100 years ago, my big brother and I went to a community college nearby, one from which he just retired as dean, which is interesting. Never planned it that way, never planned that he would be back teaching at the same community college that we started at. But that was fine with us. So it's a good path for first-time college students in the family. You can then go on, or you can then go out and find employment. But it takes people who are committed to that kind of teaching commitment and that kind of diversity to want to do that. What is interesting is that more and more community colleges are actually looking for PhDs. Not necessarily for the right reason. I think it's basically a prestige thing. And they want to say that they have more PhDs on their faculty. There are about 20% of the faculty at community colleges now have PhDs, and that number is growing slightly. So don't rule it out. But as my brother said when he, as dean, when he used to interview people, he said most of them, you know, they had no clue about what we did. I don't know how they, didn't even read their website. They came in, they talked about their research and whatever, and they're just not going to do that at a community college. And the ones that really had done their homework and were really clear why they wanted to be teachers at that level were actually more attractive by having a PhD. So it's something you might want to consider. Okay, in addition to all of that, there are positions at universities for PhDs who are not faculty. They're not teaching, and they're not they're not teaching. They're not on the faculty track. And there are many such positions at universities, and you might want to think about them. Some of them are very exciting and very interesting. Several of them that I know about involve administration, but they're involved directing some kind of research enterprise, some kind of research center in the field for which that person is specialty is. And I was telling some people at lunch today at Stanford, we have dozens of these centers, and one is called CARS, C-A-R-S, and it stands for the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford. It's too good to be true, right? The director of that worked at Ford Motor Company. As a PhD, worked at Ford Motor Company as a researcher, came to Stanford, and now runs that center and manages the grants and things that go to faculty. I know dozens of people at Stanford who fit that bill. And there are many others in other fields having to do anywhere from student services to in the medical field and so forth and so on. You might want to think about that. It puts you in a university environment. It can be quite rewarding. You certainly will be respected there, but you'll be doing something different, and you need to think about whether that's something that would work for you. But the point is that with a PhD, but often they require PhDs, and so that's something that you're eligible for. And then finally, the notion of a position not at a university or a college even, but out in industry or in the government, for which you then spend maybe part of your time teaching. For many, this is a very rewarding way to go. It kind of depends on the physical environment and the location, the geographic location that you're talking about, because some things are more available than others. I mentioned again at lunch that in the Boston area, of course, or in my area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, there are lots of employers of PhDs, mostly industry, but in some places it's government labs and so forth and so on. And there are a zillion opportunities for these people to teach part-time if they want at local colleges. I mentioned that San Jose State University has 30,000 students, but that's 30,000 regular students, although some of them are part-time. It has another 30,000 students who are adults that live in Silicon Valley that go through the extension program. And these are courses offered at 8 a.m. and on Saturdays and many in the evening. And they're taught by people like yourselves who are working in the Valley at various companies. But for many, that's just a wonderful thing to do. They just really like just one class at a time. It's rewarding, and yet they have their other job. Okay. So those are a range of possibilities that are something useful for us to talk about and consider. Now I want to say a few things about this strategy that I think can help prepare you for all of this. One question I didn't ask when we started, I asked the fields here. Let me ask you this question. How many of you believe, your advisors aren't here, how many of you believe you are within 12 months of finishing your PhD or a postdoc? The good news is the rest of you all have time to do some of the things that I'm talking about. Right? So how many of you believe that you're from 1 to 2 years towards finishing? Oh, very good. And by the way, there were a few hands that went up in the first place. How many say 3 or 4 years? The rest maybe a little longer. The point is that even if you're graduating this year, this academic year, you can get going on some of these things. But if you're not, all the better. Because this is a strategy you can apply now, you can apply later in your life, but you need to get started on it. It applies to all of these people. Okay. I call it the three-way stretch preparation strategy. It's something you can start now And the best thing, again, if you have time, is you can do a little bit at a time. And you can enjoy it. And it can give you a break from the research that you're doing without consuming too much time. But it does require you to get out of the lab or the library or wherever you're spending a lot of your time, and actually make some contacts and actually get to know people. And it's possible to, in the process, enjoy it as well. I'll tell you. No, let me go on. Okay. The three-way stretch has three components, what I call breadth on top of depth, next stage, and multiple options. Breadth on top of depth. I'm going to talk about three of these, of course, in some detail now. Next stage, and multiple options. Okay. So, breadth on top of depth involves placing your developing expertise, the ones that you're really developing now in a deep hole here in this PhD, in a way in which you can see how it relates to a broader area that got you interested in the first place. So imagine this table. These tables represent the broader area in which you, at least as an undergraduate, were interested. Some aspect of human evolution, let's say, or maybe just evolution in general. And now you're specializing in human evolution. Whatever it was that initially got you interested represents the surface of this table, and the legs of the table, the legs of the table represent specialties, and right now you have one. So actually this is great. These tables are great. They've got one leg. And that's your specialty, okay? That's your depth. Later, you're going to be involved with a table with many legs. That's it. Okay, so your depth, your PhD dissertation, your postdoc focused research is that leg. And the field, though, is the broader field is here, and the table. And you want to pay attention to that because as you go forward, you're going to drill down some more legs here that are going to represent additional related specialties. Now, it's only this table. It's not all these tables, okay? So you're obviously interested in certain things and not a lot of other things. But you're interested in more than just the one thing that you're working on now for your PhD. I'll give you a quick example of this. When I was writing my book 15 years ago or whatever, I ran into a guy at Virginia Polytechnic and State University. He was a materials science professor, okay? And I asked him how he was, what was he working on? And he said, I work on semiconductor packaging. I package semiconductor chips. When you have a wafer, when you have a lot of chips, the chip itself comes off of the wafer. They're called die, and there are hundreds or more on a given wafer. But once they come off, they have to be packaged. And that's a non-trivial problem. In some cases, there are 100 or more leads that go in and out of the package, and they have to be protected against radiation and whatever. So it was a very legitimate, well-funded field, semiconductor packaging. That was his expertise. I ran into him about 7 years later, and I said, "How's semiconductor packaging going?" And he says, "Oh well, it's going okay. I'm doing a little bit of that, but that's not really what I'm about." I said, "Well, what are you about?" He says, "I'm a surface science expert." He says, I said, "What's that mean?" He says, "Well, I'm an expert on how different materials stick together." Okay, and that made sense in the context of semiconductor packaging. He's putting these packages around the die. Okay. Well, he told me a story, and it was really quite interesting. What had happened is he had gone to a party. He wasn't in the lab. He went to a social event at Virginia Polytechnic, and he met a dentistry professor. They have a dental school there, and he met a dentistry professor, and the dentistry professor was working on crown adhesion, okay, and how to get the crowns sticking together. And they started talking, and the materials, the surface science guy, he didn't even call himself a surface science guy. He was a semiconductor packaging guy. But he began to realize, well, wait a minute, what I really know is how different materials stick together. And they got together and they wrote a grant, a small grant actually, and got started on a collaboration on dental crowns, adhesion. Okay? He then got introduced by the dental professor to a doctor, a medical doctor, a professor in the medical school there, who was doing implantable prosthesis devices, in the knees in particular. Again, different materials sticking together. They got together and wrote a grant. So this guy, it's not like he started with this view, but over time he began to realize, hey, wait a minute. My expertise is how different materials stick together, and under that table, that's the table, how things stick together. Okay, different materials stick together. Under that table, there are legs. There are the semiconductor packaging leg, there's the dental crown, and there's the implantable prosthesis devices, and who knows what else. And it was good because it also turns out funding for the packaging had started to slip, and he was getting less interested in anyway. Okay, so use that as an example. Where is your table? Don't lose sight of that as you go forward. Next stage. Okay, this enables you to think ahead, look ahead, and act ahead the stage that you're already in, towards the stage that you want to go to. Let me give you an example for all of you. Virtually everyone in here who's a PhD student or a postdoc, as a senior, as an undergraduate senior, you must have, I bet you did some research. What I mean by that is you were in a lab, or you were in the library, you were doing a special project, a senior project of one kind or another, but you were beginning to do just a little bit of the things that graduate students do. You may not even realize that was what you were doing, but you were. So you were practicing the next stage as a senior undergraduate. Now, as a PhD student, you're doing things that a little bit of things that postdocs do or that faculty do. In addition to your research, you're undoubtedly reading other papers. You're undoubtedly looking at proposals. I hope you are. Your advisor is probably asking you to help review a proposal or maybe even write a section of a proposal. Some of you are getting teaching experiences, TA-ships, maybe something more than a TA-ship. These are all things that are done in the next stage, okay? As a postdoc, you're supervising graduate students to some extent. You have more of a role in writing proposals. You're doing things more like what a professor will do. There are two advantages for doing that. One is it tells you if it's something you might like to do. So getting some teaching experience along the way, not a lot, but some, is a way of you personally knowing that, hey, okay, this is something I might want to do, or you can find out it's something you don't want to do. But the second thing that it does is it tells potential employer, whether it's, a postdoc employer or a university or a college, it tells them that you've tried something out and that, again, you believe that it's something that you can get better at and would like to do. It used to be, years ago, that all you had to do was demonstrate that you were really good as a PhD student and the rest would follow. But now I'm seeing more and more evidence that people want to actually see you dip your toes in the water and actually try some of these things. So, breadth on top of depth, keep in mind other possibilities. Most of you who are postdocs have already got your second leg going, again, within the table. Next stage, and then finally, multiple options. Allows you to prepare concurrently, this is what Glenn was talking about, for things other than a specific kind of faculty position. The good news is that for most of you, there are other options. There are other options in industry, there are other options at universities, as I mentioned, that don't involve faculty positions. There are other options in government facilities, research labs, and so on. And so you should be thinking about all of these things as you get ready to graduate or get ready to complete your postdoc. Make those contacts. Now, you're only going to really do one thing unless you, again, have that full-time position in industry and just teach part-time. You're really going to accept one of these things. But the nice thing about becoming a professor is that if all the work you've done while you're a PhD student or a postdoc in making contacts with Sandia Labs or Lawrence Livermore Labs or whatever it is, or in, with different companies, that isn't lost. As a professor, that information and those contacts will redound to your benefit, particularly when you want to get money and you want to apply for research support in one way or another. So nothing is really lost here in spreading yourself out and looking at other possibilities. It also gives you more confidence. It also reduces your risks. Okay? And who knows, you may actually find that some of these things are more attractive. Okay. So those are the strategies that I'm talking about. Quickly, let me just mention again what Glenn hinted about. This Tomorrow's Professor e-newsletter consists of postings of about 1,500 to 2,000 words that I put together twice a week. I don't write these. I get them, not 1,500 of them. I don't write them. I get them from published sources. Either I get them from articles that appear online in certain journals, or I take them from excerpts in books, book chapters or pieces of chapters. I do all this with permission. I have, over the years, gotten about 1,000 books, almost, that have come to me, that come from publishers. They give them to me free. And, of course, the trade-off is they get the publicity that goes with, I always say, that it's from this book, and here's how to get this book, and so forth and so on. But I've acquired over, well, maybe not 1,000, but 700 books anyway. I give them to our Center for Teaching and Learning at Stanford. And then I have a lot of magazines that I also have permission. I don't get the magazines, I just take them to them online. And it's in all sorts of different areas. There are, and again, 58,000 letters, different colleges, over 100 countries. I used to say, well, let me tell you a quick story, very quick. I used to say I had subscribers in countries from A to Z, okay? And about 10 years ago, the student who was working with me on this comes in and says, "We lost Zimbabwe." Well, the one subscriber we had in Zimbabwe, this is about 12 years ago, the one subscriber we had in Zimbabwe has unsubscribed, so he's no longer there. I said, well, get him back, or get Zaire, or get Zambia. So I guess it was a few years ago when we came up to the 10th anniversary, because it's been going about 15 years. So I wrote the blog, the posting for that 10th anniversary, and it kind of, told how we've grown and all that. I told this story. And so then I get all these emails, not a lot, but I get these emails from Zaire and Zambia and so on. So we're here, there's maybe a dozen, 2 dozen subscribers there. So I can still say A to Z. Okay. There are 5 categories, academia, and here are just 2 examples of titles. New faculty awards, well, you can see that. And then there are 3 other categories, managing your academic career, teaching and learning, and research. So it's preparing for an academic career, academia awards, you can see what those are. And as Glenn said, all the past postings are posted, of course, on a website. You can then search. And you can search by keywords. And there's quite a few now. There's almost 1,500. So actually, that can be a useful tool if you want to know about some aspect of whatever it is. Put those keywords in, and you're going to get some number of postings that are going to pop up that you didn't notice in the posting. You just click on them. So it's a good start. As I say, I'm actually going to subscribe you to this, unless you come up here afterwards and say, whatever you do, don't do that. Nobody does that. But I think it's something that you'll find useful. Okay. That. Yes.
What would you have to do? A lot of your, most of your discussion was focused on PhD.
Yes.
What would you say about people who are in the master's process?
Right. Well, again, if you want, so the question was, what about people who are completing their master's degree, but they're not going to go on for a PhD? One option is certainly at community colleges. And particularly if you've gotten some teaching experience along the way, it can show that you're really committed to that group of students and you've done your homework. I did say that more and more they're looking at PhDs, but it's still 20%. What they really want is that person with a master's degree in a particular field who has demonstrated that they want to teach at the community college level. So that's one possibility. There are some other possibilities at colleges and universities in the administrative area, although I can tell you at the 4-year and above colleges, they're looking for PhDs. They really are. It would have to be a specialty. I have a son, let's see, he's my granddaughter's husband. I don't know what that makes it. But his specialty is beer, making beer. He lives in Colorado, he lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he's worked for years at this microbrewing company. And he knows everything you can imagine about brewing beer. And one of the schools in New Mexico, down near New Mexico Tech actually, but not that one, wants to start, apparently there's a big demand for people who want to start microbreweries in New Mexico. And they want to hire him to run this program. And he will do that. He has a bachelor's degree. That's what he's got. But he's got that expertise. So that does happen from time to time. But community colleges, certainly high schools, would be interested in that. Yes, you are? Yes?
Dana Cloud, I'm the faculty liaison in communication.
Oh, I thought you were the postdoc, but anyway.
No, I'm not a postdoc.
I do.
Yeah, thank you. But anyway, a lot of our students are here. We have a master's program.
Yep.
But mostly aspiring to a PhD. I just wanted to say a couple of words about how, if you were undertaking some
Excuse me, do you want to come out here so people over there can see you?
I don't know.
You're off in the corner.
So what I wanted to say was, if people are undertaking these non-traditional paths by choice,
Yes.
these are all very delightful. However, we know that universities, including Syracuse, have been increasingly employing part-time contingent and non-tenure track labor. So basically you can get someone teaching more undergraduates. They have PhDs, these teachers. They may even do some research, but they cost a quarter to a half as much. And well, just as an aside, I think we need to be really sober about the adjunct experience and jokes like the Rhodes Scholar, because like I was in Texas and there was a woman who was teaching at 4 local colleges, and she literally died in her car while sleeping in it in the wintertime with the heat on, because she could not afford to rent a house. She taught at 4 different places, and she lived in her car. So this, I mean, that kind of thing is real, not by choice, and I think another thing that people who are going to be on the tenure track need to understand is how part-time contingent and non-tenure track faculty, growing reliance on them, threatens the sort of protection of tenure. Because people start to realize, oh my God, these people are willing to work for half the money and do twice as much work and still be PhDs and so on. And then that enables kind of this move from the top down at many universities to limit and decrease the number of tenured track and tenured professors that they have. So I just think thinking about structure and economics and being kind of sober about that is really important, and to think about sort of voluntary and by choice creativity on the one hand, and then the kind of really not so pretty necessities that some people
I
have.
couldn't agree more. This is a huge topic. The number of tenure track positions, I don't know where it is now, but it's as low as it's ever been, and the number of these contingent employment opportunities are the highest. It is one thing I used to teach an astronomy class at a community college in the evening, but I worked at Stanford. That was just a fun extra thing to do, and yeah, they paid me, but whatever. I had colleagues who really were literally going around to 4 or 5 schools and kludging something together. You got paid by the classroom hour. So, and the rate sounded good, but so okay, you get whatever it is per hour for 3 hours, but it's all the rest that goes into preparing and grading and doing all of that, which you weren't getting paid for. There's even a community college in Southern California, I think it's called Orange Community College, I'm not sure, it doesn't matter, I think they have 95% contingent faculty. They don't have offices. They don't. Students still don't get this. You know, they don't stick around to talk to students in office hours. Why should they? I mean, they're getting paid just for their contact hour in the classroom. So it hurts the institution as well. It's nice to say that. Some schools really believe that and won't do that. A lot of others, it's the budgetary pressures that you're talking about, and it's not a pretty world. That's a bigger discussion to have about whether going on for a PhD makes sense, whether
Can I just say, what I mean is that people should not get PhDs. What I'm saying is that universities should take care to understand exactly what's happening. I mean, a lot of them are making those choices willfully, but that the very structure of higher education is very different, is becoming very different. And so it's not a matter of choosing PhD or not PhD, even if whatever you do, this stuff is going to happen. And it's, I think it's something to be concerned about on a social level and with your higher administration to actually talk about this. That's why I'm talking about it. So,
in fact, the last posting I sent out on Thursday dealt with this issue, and I've already gotten some feedback about that. One of them sent me an article that he wrote called 100 Reasons Not to Get a PhD. I only got through the first 5 or 6. I'm sure there are 100 reasons, but in any case, way in the back here. Yes.
So, hi everybody. Leading off of that question, I mean, unfortunately I've been in this discussion for way longer than I'm supposed to be. What advice do you have for us in terms of thinking about doing that whole notion of profession, part-time, adjunct, thinking about this as an alternative, especially given the fact that it's not easy to establish professional relations for students who've chosen the academic track, who are changing paths now, and the whole realities of what the adjunct life provides for us if we choose that first and try to set up our professional life second. You know, what kind of advice do you have for us when, in terms of these realities and what our next steps should be?
Right. Certainly going the other way in the sense of having your professional life first and then setting up opportunities to teach as an adjunct is much easier. And although again, I think it will depend to a certain extent geographically where you are. But I can tell you, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you're working, you have your professional career at a company in the area, there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to teach part-time. But again, that's kind of like the situation I had. And it's a nice situation, and it's fun and all that. But certainly going the adjunct route first. I think this whole business of going from one place to another, I would just avoid it. I just think you shouldn't be in your plans. You should not enter that track of driving around, and again, it is literally the case, driving around from one school to another or whatever. There are some adjunct professorships that are full-time or close to full-time, but they're temporary. And I have students who've taken those. At Stanford, in fact, we have programs, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, where PhDs, they're kind of almost like postdocs, really, in history or something like that, or in English, where they actually assist with the development of a course that's required for all undergraduates or something like that. And these are called lectureships of one kind or another. And they sort of fit in that adjunct category. They're 3-year appointments. That can be okay, particularly in those fields. It's almost understood that you would do something like that. But then moving on. But the part-time piece together works if you have another source of income, or you're with someone who has another source of income. And some people do. And that, again, can be a lot of fun. But if it's the only source of income, it's not a good deal. And I would think of those other alternatives. It may come down to that. It may be that a position at the university, but not in the faculty track, or a position in a government lab or industry, might just be the thing. You say, well, I want to teach. Well, okay, fine. You don't have to teach all the time. you teach one class a semester. That can be quite rewarding. You have to play that, but I think I definitely agree that these part-time piece together things, but aren't going to be true.
So Rick, one thing is that we all recognize that we're in a rapidly changing world, and certainly a more competitive world. And I'm wondering if that's going to have an impact on how decisions should be made about going into academia or industry. Possibly even there may be changes in tenure rules. And I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit about moving into the future a little bit. How is the landscape going to change for the commission?
Right. You know, well, this is a good question, of course, and you know, we've seen a lot of changes. Some of them are driven by technology, and they make things possible that weren't possible before. And then there's sort of this general sense of, you know, putting your roots down in one place for your full professional life is something that is going to be less and less common. You're going to be shifting from one place to another. That's not necessarily bad. It can be quite interesting. It can give you a variety. So I certainly see a trend in that direction, but I don't know whether, to what extent it's going, you know, how broad it is. I know at places like Stanford, they'll probably continue to have tenure and continue to have people applying and, you know, having a good applicant pool. In other places, it's going to be more diverse. And an example, again, you give of all of these schools with all these part-time faculty, I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that's sustainable. Another trend is in the way in which teaching is done. And again, this is not a talk about technology and education or the changes that have come about. But there are tipping points at various times when something actually becomes really useful. A good example is what's called blended learning. Blended learning is something I've done when I was a high school teacher, which is basically not lecture the whole time. It's basically involving my students in all sorts of activities of one kind or another. Big deal. And you say, well, that makes sense. We do that a lot. Today, the options to do that and the resources that are available are so much greater than they were when I was doing that. That you see, a tipping point has come, and in almost every field now, people are bringing things from YouTube, bringing things from the web and whatever. There are all sorts of mini pieces that are put together. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting new stuff done in the way things are packaged and put together in terms of teaching. But I still believe that, you know, we will not see the calculus teacher for the nation or the history teacher for the nation as has been predicted for 100 years. When radio first came out, the broadcast was going to send these great history lectures around the country, and people would sign up for them, and that's it. We take the best teachers. It was audio, of course, not video, but it was audio, and it could work in some fields. And guess what? It did. And we all those of us who are old enough remember listening to educational radio programs. But they didn't supplant everything else. They found a niche. Then when television came along in the 50s, that was really going to do it, because now we have video, and so now we have educational TV. And guess what? Again, it worked. There are places that adapted that, and there are educational television programs that you can watch. Didn't replace the universities or colleges. Then in the late 50s, early 60s, videotape came along. So that was really going to do it. And indeed, I taught an astronomy course on videotape that was sent out. Those tapes were actually mailed out to the schools, and they put them in these cassette players, and they would do that. And that worked for, again, some groups of people. It made a lot of sense, as did online education. It's possible now to actually get a master's degree in electrical engineering, in computer science, in industrial engineering, and in mechanical engineering from Stanford University while living in Singapore. and never coming to Stanford University. You can put the degree on your wall, you can show the palm trees, red tile roofs, and say, I've never been there, but I have a master's degree from there. Okay, technology has enabled that. But again, it's not the most common route, any more than some of the other new things that have come along. So there's going to be a lot more of that kind of thing going on. A lot more research collaboration among people at different universities, partly because of a funding issue. I think we'll see a lot more of that, a lot more cross-disciplinary efforts. And there are a lot of other things that I think I'm well aware of it. It's 5:40. I hope you took the food as dinner. I think maybe I'll stop here. And again, I will send you stuff if I get your email address. You make sure that Glenn has your email address, so I will have your email address. But if for some reason you just don't hear from me for a while or whatever, just send me a message at least instead. Thank you.
We're done.